Get your hands off my hair! Kara screamed, her voice cracking against the cinder block walls. You can't do this! This is assault! Relax, Officer Reed Carter drawled, one gloved hand fisted in her curls. You're in our house now! The clippers buzzed to life with a vicious snarl. Kara's heart slammed against her ribs. I am Judge Kara Hale. I have rights. Miles Walker hesitated by the door, jaw tight, eyes flickering between Reed and the trembling black woman strapped to the chair. Judge, janitor. Doesn't matter, Archer Sullivan muttered. Everyone gets processed. The first lock fell. They didn't know. They were shaving the hair of the woman who would soon hold their freedom, maybe their entire lives, in her hands. By the time Kara Hale saw the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror, she had already rehearsed the conversation she expected. Good evening, officer. Yes, Your Honor. Sorry, I didn't recognize you. Have a good night. That was how it usually went, when the badge recognized the bench. Tonight it didn't. She signaled, pulled over to the curb, and rolled down the window. The late-night air of Brookstone hummed with a faint summer heat and the distant thump of music from a bar down the street. She was still in the simple black dress she'd worn to the community forum, the one where she'd spoken about building trust between law enforcement and marginalized communities. The irony would come later. The officer approached with a heavy, irritated stride, white, tall, square shoulders. His name tag glinted in the streetlight, R. Carter. License and registration, he barked, before her fingers even left the steering wheel. Kara kept her voice even. Good evening, officer. May I ask why I'm being stopped? You were swerving, he snapped. You been drinking tonight? No, she said. I was avoiding a pothole on license and registration, he repeated louder, as if her words were static. Her jaw tightened. She moved slowly, deliberately, reaching for her purse. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. This was not new. Traffic stops had always come with an extra layer of calculation for her. Long before the black robe, long before the nameplate that read, Honorable Kara Hale. She passed him the documents. I'm Judge Hale, she added calmly, from the county courthouse. Reed glanced at the license, then at her face. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Annoyance? Then vanished. Step out of the car. She blinked. Excuse me? His stance widened. Step out of the car, ma'am. Her throat tightened. There was a second officer behind him now, shorter, broad-shouldered, light brown hair under the cap. His name tag, M. Walker. Rookie, she guessed. His young face was stiff with unease. Officer, Kara said, forcing steel into her voice. Is there a lawful basis for this order? I am cooperating. I have identified myself. Reed leaned down, his face filling the window, breath hot and sour with coffee. You refusing to step out, ma'am? I'm asking you to tell me why. That's it. He yanked her door open. Step out of the vehicle now. She felt the familiar surge of anger and the quieter, colder familiarity of fear. Slowly, she stepped out, hands visible, posture composed. Miles shifted his weight. Carter, maybe we can... You see her swerving too, Walker? Reed snapped without looking at him. Smelled alcohol? Miles' mouth pressed into a line. Didn't smell. Conduct the pat-down, Reed ordered. Kara started. You do not have probable cause. He grabbed her arm, spinning her toward the hood. Her palms slammed against the metal. Pain shot through her wrists. You're resisting, Reed said. I am not resisting, she snapped, but her voice hit the night air too loudly. She knew, even as the words left her, how it would look on the report. Cuff her, Reed said. She felt the metal circle her wrists, too tight, deliberately so. Behind her, Miles' breath was shallow. His hands were careful, almost apologetic, but they didn't undo the steel. This is an unlawful arrest, Kara said, forcing her voice to steady. I will be lodging. Yeah, Reed muttered. You judges think the world revolves around you. Tonight, you're just another drunk swerving in my city. I told you, I haven't been... He pushed her toward the squad car. Her head clipped the door frame. Stars burst behind her eyes. Watch it, Miles hissed, a flash of anger breaking through. Carter, she hit her. She's fine, Reed said flatly. You fine, ma'am? Kara swallowed the pain. You're making a very serious mistake, Reed smirked. Funny, that's exactly what the last guy I arrested said. They shoved her into the back seat. The door slammed. The world shrank to the cage of metal and glass, the cold bite of the cuffs, the muffled murmur of their voices in the front. She rested her forehead against the cool window and closed her eyes. Breathe, Kara. Think. You know the system. You've seen it from the bench. You know how quickly dignity disappears when you're the one in cuffs. At the Brookstone Police Department, the fluorescent lights were cruel and bright. The booking sergeant frowned at her ID. Judge? He repeated. Like, actually a judge? Yes, Kara said tightly. And I want to speak to Judge, Bishop, Princess of Genovia, I don't care, Reed cut in. She blew through traffic, resisted. Standard processing. Resisted? Kara protested. I ask questions. The camera will show it, Reed said, jerking his head at the corner where the red light of a surveillance lens blinked. His tone made it clear he considered it a dare, not a safeguard. The sergeant hesitated, then shrugged. Standard processing, he echoed. Walker, Sullivan, handle intake. Archer Sullivan appeared then, older than the others, eyes tired and hard. He looked Kara up and down, gaze lingering on her thick, natural curls, pulled into a high puff, still slightly frizzed from the humid night. Property in the bin, Archer said. Shoes, jewelry, hairpins, whatever. She's a judge, Miles said quietly. Maybe we should... Policy, Archer said. Policy doesn't care what she is. They led her down a narrow hallway to a small intake room. Walls painted the color of old bones. A metal chair was bolted to the floor. A table stood against the wall holding a clipboard, zip ties, and electric clippers. Kara's stomach dropped. No, she said, voice suddenly very small. No, you're not. Lice protocol, Archer said. We shave all detainees with long hair coming into holding, cuts down on risk. I'm here on a traffic stop, Kara said. You know that's not true. You know that isn't policy. Reed leaned against the wall, arms crossed, smirk sharp. You refusing intake, ma'am? Miles' eyes were wide now. Sullivan, this isn't... we don't even do that anymore except... Policy, Archer repeated, but there was a crack in his voice. Not doubt, weariness. Kara's chest heaved. Her hair wasn't just hair. It was years of carefully unlearning shame, of proudly walking into a courtroom with her coils, knowing some people saw unprofessional, and she was there to redefine the word. Touch my hair, she said, voice suddenly low and deadly calm, and I will own this department. Reed pushed off the wall. Sit her down. Miles took a step forward. Carter, Sullivan, come on, she's a judge. Let's just... Reed turned on him. You got something you want to say, Walker? Miles opened his mouth, closed it. His gaze flicked to Kara's, met the raw fear, the fury there. His throat bobbed. Archer's hand landed heavy on Miles's shoulder. We don't make special rules. You want to get eaten alive by every lawyer in the city when they hear you gave a judge extra privileges? Sit this one out, kid. And if you do this, Kara said, what do you think those lawyers will do when the story breaks, when the footage surfaces? Reed's eyes slid to the red camera light again, and then back to her, a flicker of calculation. Footage gets lost sometimes. The room spun for a moment. Kara felt suddenly very chillingly small. They strapped her into the chair. The leather cut into her wrists and ankles. She fought the rising scream inside her, the urge to thrash, to spit, to become the thing they already saw. Please, she whispered, hating the crack in her voice. Don't! There was a split second where Miles could have stepped in. He stood there, fists opening and closing at his sides, jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. Walker, Archer said. Door! Miles swallowed, stepped back, and closed it. The clippers roared. The first pass tore through her curls like a mechanical storm. She felt the tug, the obscene lightness as a chunk of hair fell, dark against the pale floor. Her jaw locked. She would not cry. She would not give them that. Reed worked with quick, careless strokes. Archer watched, arms folded. Miles stared at the floor. In the corner, the camera blinked its unblinking red. When it was done, Kara's scalp tingled with exposure. They unstrapped her and shoved a small, scratched piece of mirror into her hands, as if this was some kind of courtesy. She stared at the stranger, looking back at her. Buzzed hair, small cuts along the hairline, eyes too big, too bare. It wasn't the hair that hurt the most. It was what it had meant, what they had decided they could take. I will see you again, she said softly, not to anyone in particular. Maybe to the camera, maybe to the room. Reed snorted. Not if I can help it. Help? He had no idea how wrong he was. The shower water in Kara's apartment ran lukewarm, no matter how long she let it thunder against the tiles. It was just after 3 in the morning when she stepped out, wrapped in a towel, skin pink from scrubbing that didn't wash anything away. The mirror above the sink was fogged except for a small, clear oval where the steam had broken. In that oval, she caught the outline of her bare scalp. She froze. For a long moment, she did nothing. No flinch, no tears. Just breathing. In, out. In, out. Then she wiped the mirror clear with the edge of her towel. The woman who stared back at her was still, and that stillness scared her more than any hysterical outburst would have. Her natural coils were gone, replaced by a too-close buzz with uneven patches where Reed's careless hand had dug in deeper. You're still you, she whispered to her reflection. Voice hoarse. Hair grows back. Hair grows back. Her mother had warned her, years ago, about what the world would do to her hair. They'll call it wild, Mama had said, fingers deftly sectioning, braiding, oiling. They'll call it unkempt when it's just unbent. You promise me, Kara, don't ever apologize for what grows out of your own head. Mama had died before she could see Kara sworn in. But she had seen the first time her daughter wore her hair in a big round afro to a law school banquet, chin lifted, daring anyone to call it unprofessional. Now, the unprofessional evidence lay on some police department floor, swept into a trash bag with the rest of the night's debris. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Scarlett Garrett flashed on the screen. Kara hesitated, then answered. It's late, she said. Scarlett's voice was sharp with worry. Late is when good people get hurt by bad systems. I got your text. What happened? Kara's throat tightened. She hadn't meant to text. It had been impulse, fingers shaking as she sat in the holding cell after they'd finally processed her, released her on her own recognizance, and muttered some half-hearted apology about miscommunication. The text had been 4 words. They shaved my hair. I was pulled over, Kara said, forcing her voice steady. Officer claimed I was swerving. I wasn't. I identified myself. He arrested me anyway, took me in, intake, escalated. Escalated how? Scarlett asked, her tone already shifting into attorney mode, clipped, precise, lethal. Kara stared at her reflection. They strapped me to a chair, shaved my head, called it policy. On the other end, Scarlett swore softly. Is there video? Yes, Kara said. Camera in the intake room and the body cams and the hallway. Whether it survives the night is another question. Oh, it'll survive, Scarlett said. I'll make sure of it. You know I've been circling Brookstone PD for months. Your case? Kara, this could blow everything open. Kara closed her eyes. She could see it now. Headlines, interviews, think pieces. Black judge humiliated by police, she would become a symbol, a lightning rod. And every defense attorney with a client arrested by Reed Carter would file a motion to recuse her, to overturn her past decisions for bias, to drag her name, her rulings, her integrity through the mud. "This is not about me," Kara said. Scarlett's voice softened. "It happened to you." "It happens to people in my courtroom every week," Kara replied, surprising herself with the ferocity in her own tone. "People without a title, without a robe. If I make this about me, if I stand at a podium and cry on cue, you know what they'll say. That you're exploiting it, that you're biased, that you're trying to take down the police department for revenge," Scarlett finished grimly. "Yes, I know the script." Silence stretched between them, filled with all the unspoken calculus of power and optics. "Then what do you want to do?" Scarlett asked. Kara opened her eyes. The woman in the mirror looked back, raw and stripped, but there was something else there too, a hard, bright line of resolve. "I want accountability," she said. "Real accountability. Not a PR apology, not a suspension with pay. I want them held to the same standard they hold everyone else to when they say, 'Ignorance of the law is no excuse.'" Scarlett exhaled slowly. "Internal affairs?" "And beyond," Kara said. "But we start there, quietly, on paper. We do this by the book, so when they accuse me of revenge, the record says otherwise." "You file the complaint, I'll file the civil suit," Scarlett said. "We can do both." "Not yet," Kara said. Scarlett's sharp intake of breath crackled through the line. "Kara." "I'm still on the bench," Kara said. "I have active criminal dockets involving Brookstone PD officers. If I publicly sue them right now, they'll move to recuse me from half my calendar, and they'll probably win. Then those cases get reassigned to judges who don't see what I see, judges who think what happened tonight is a fluke, not a pattern." Scarlett was quiet for a beat. "So your plan is, what? Stay silent?" "No," Kara said. "Never silent, but strategic." She thought of the camera, the blinking red light, the way Reed had looked at it, arrogance curdling into something like fear. He knew, on some level, that what he was doing wouldn't survive sunlight. "I'll file an official complaint," Kara said. "Document everything. Dates, times, names, injuries. I'll demand that the footage be preserved. You, on the outside, can make it very clear to the city that if anything happens to that footage, they're looking at obstruction on top of civil rights violations." Scarlett's lawyer brain was already spinning. "And when this complaint triggers an investigation, I recuse from anything directly connected," Kara said quietly. "But I stay on as many cases as ethically possible. I'm no good to anyone if they sideline me." "And the hair?" Scarlett asked gently. Kara looked at herself again, the buzzed scalp, the small cuts. "Hair grows back," she repeated. "Their choices don't." There was a knock at her apartment door. Her stomach clenched. "Hold on," she told Scarlett, padding barefoot to the door, tightening the towel around her. She peered through the peephole. Grayson Warner, the district attorney, stood in the hallway in a rumpled suit, tie loosened, eyes shadowed. Kara's sigh came from somewhere deep. "Of course." She opened the door a crack. "Grayson, it's 3:20 in the morning." "I heard," he said simply, eyes flickering to her hair and then deliberately away, as if pretending not to notice could undo it. "Can I come in?" "Scarlett's on the phone," Kara said. "You might as well know that," he grimaced. "Of course she is." "Put me on speaker," Scarlett said dryly. "I'd hate to miss the part where the DA tells a judge to not make trouble." Grayson closed his eyes briefly, then stepped inside. Kara put the call on speaker and set the phone on the counter. "You know they crossed every line," Scarlett said without preamble. "You know this isn't just a bad night. Carter has had complaints for years. Grayson rubbed his temples. And you know what happens if this blows up right now. I have a gang indictment tied to Carter's arrests going to trial in 6 weeks. If his credibility implodes, 12 violent felons walk on reasonable doubt. And if you bury this, Scarlett shot back, you're telling every cop in Brookstone they can strap a woman to a chair and dehumanize her as long as they brought in enough bodies for your statistics. Grayson's gaze went to Kara. What do you want me to do? She thought of the men in orange jumpsuits she'd sentenced based on Carter's testimony. The mothers who'd cried, the communities begging for safety, and the communities begging for mercy, often the same ones. I want the truth, Kara said quietly. All of it. If his cases crumble because the truth comes out, then they crumble. That's the cost of building prosecutions on rotten ground. Grayson's eyes were tired. Easy for you to say from the bench. Her laughter was sharp, humorless. I was strapped to a chair 3 hours ago while your star witness shaved my head like I was property. Don't talk to me about easy. Silence. Finally, Grayson nodded once. I'll call Internal Affairs personally. I'll demand full preservation of any footage involving Judge Hale tonight. I'll open a file, but I can't promise you the politics won't get ugly. Ugly is already here, Kara said. We're just deciding whether to pretend we don't see it. After he left and the call with Scarlett ended, the apartment fell quiet again. The night pressed in. Kara stood in front of the mirror one last time before bed. The face staring back at her wasn't the one she'd started the night with, but there was a clarity there she hadn't expected. You will not break me, she whispered to the empty room. You will teach me. Later, when she finally slept, it was not their hands in her dreams, but the blinking red light of the camera, steady as a heartbeat. 3 months later, Kara stood in chambers, adjusting her new robe. Her hair had grown into a soft, even halo of curls close to her scalp, intentional instead of torn. The first time she'd walked into court with it, there had been a murmur, whispers, double takes, a couple of awkward compliments. She had met them all with the same calm, unbothered stare. The complaint she'd filed had not disappeared. Internal Affairs had interviewed her twice. Scarlett had filed a preservation letter that sent a chill down the city's spine, and piece by piece, a pattern emerged. Body cam compilations, intake videos where detainees, black, brown, poor, flinched as clippers buzzed to life. Carter's name cropped up again and again. So did Archer Sullivan's. Miles Walker's name appeared too, less often, usually standing in the background, jaw tight, eyes haunted. He had not filed a report, but in one interview under pressure, he had admitted that he didn't feel right about the hair shavings. It wasn't courage, not exactly, but it was a crack. The department had tried to circle its wagons. The union had called it standard safety procedure. The chief had issued a bland statement about ongoing review. Then the footage leaked. A local reporter with a conscience and a contact in IT got hold of a few clips. One showed Kara strapped to the chair, eyes blazing as her curls fell. The story hit the news like a match dropped into dry grass. And still, Kara did not hold a press conference. She went to work. She heard cases. She read motions. She watched as the city buzzed around her name and chose not to step into the center of the storm. One morning in early autumn, her clerk, a meticulous man named Alvarez, knocked on her chamber door. Your Honor, he said. New assignment from the presiding judge. High-profile case. They're cycling it through the random wheel to avoid accusations of cherry-picking. She raised a brow. High-profile how? Civil rights, Alvarez said, passing her the file. Federal prosecutors referred it down. The Attorney General's office is watching. Excessive force, pattern and practice, unlawful detention, dehumanizing intake procedures. Her hands froze on the manila folder. The names printed on the cover in neat capital letters were a litany she knew too well. State of Everett vs. Reed Carter, Archer Sullivan, Miles Walker. Her heart lurched. Random assignment, Alvarez repeated, oblivious to the storm gathering behind her composed face. Your name came up on the rotation. The courthouse is already buzzing. Kara swallowed. The edges of the folder dug into her fingers. And the presiding judge knows that you filed the initial complaint? Alvarez nodded. Yes. He said, and I quote, if Judge Hale wants to recuse, we'll support it. If she thinks she can remain impartial despite her involvement, she's one of the few people who actually understands the scope of harm here. His words, not mine. A dozen ethical alarms went off in Kara's mind. Canon 3 of the Code of Judicial Conduct. Avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety. Recusal when impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Reasonable people, she knew, would have questions. Have defense counsel been notified? She asked. Not yet, Alvarez said. We're just getting started. Scheduling conference first, then pre-trial motions. You can decide to recuse before then, Your Honor. He left the folder on her desk and slipped out, closing the door softly behind him. The room felt suddenly too small. Kara sat down. Her fingers brushed the top of the folder but didn't open it yet. She stared at her diploma on the wall, at the framed photo of her and her mother on her law school graduation day, Mama's hands in her curls, pride shining in her eyes. If she recused, another judge would get the case. Maybe someone meticulous and fair. Maybe someone who'd never had their body used as a canvas for someone else's power. Would that judge see what she saw in the footage? Would they hear the tremor in Miles's voice and recognize the brittle, defensive fury in Carter's? Would they understand that just shaving hair was code for removing this person's humanity? Or would they tilt toward sympathy for the uniform, toward the easy logic of split-second decisions and good officers with bad judgment calls? Her intercom buzzed. Your Honor, Alvarez's voice said, the DA is here to see you, and Ms. Garrett, together. Send them in, Kara said, exhaling. Grayson and Scarlett rarely occupied the same space without sparks. Today was no exception. Scarlett strode in first, bright red blazer like a flag, eyes on the folder on Kara's desk. Grayson followed, more rumpled than usual, files under one arm, tie already loosened at 10 a.m. So, Scarlett said, not bothering with pleasantries. You got it. I did, Kara said. Random assignment. There's no such thing as random in this building, Grayson muttered, dropping into a chair. The wheel spun, yes, but the presiding judge knew damn well this might land on you. Because he trusts her, Scarlett snapped, rounding on him. Which you should, too, instead of worrying about your conviction rate. Grayson held up his hands. I'm worrying about the city not burning to the ground. Kara let them argue for a moment, listening more to the rhythm than the words. This was familiar ground. The DA calculating fallout, the civil rights attorney pushing for maximum sunlight. You both know I can recuse, she said when the noise threatened to crescendo. If I do, no one could reasonably argue with that. Clean, simple, avoids appeals on the back end. Scarlett's gaze sharpened. And if you don't? Then the defense will move to disqualify me, Kara said. They'll say I'm a victim, that I have a personal stake. They'll file for change of venue. They'll try to paint me as vengeful. Are you? Grayson asked quietly. Vengeful? Kara met his eyes. I am angry. I am hurt. I am aware. Vengeance is about making them feel what I felt. Justice is about facing what they did, regardless of how I feel. I don't intend to confuse the two. Scarlett's expression softened. That's exactly why you should stay. Grayson sighed. Ethically, you have to disclose the conflict. You know that. On the record. Let them argue. If you deny recusal, you'd better build a transcript that shows exactly why. Kara nodded slowly. Full transparency, No secrets. If this case leaves my hands, it won't be because I tried to hide anything. She finally opened the folder. The statements were familiar, yet seeing them neatly typed in third person made it feel like a story someone else lived. On June 14th, at approximately 11:42 p.m., Judge Kara Hale was stopped by Officer Reed Carter. Intake footage shows Officer Carter shaving Judge Hale's hair after she was restrained. Other names leapt off the page. Detainees she didn't know. Latasha D. Jackson arrested for shoplifting. Luis Hernandez taken in for disorderly conduct. Each with their own footage, each with their own night of humiliation. "This isn't just my case," Kara murmured, almost to herself. "It's theirs." Grayson leaned forward. "The Attorney General's office is sending a special prosecutor. They want this clean. No whiff of local politics." "And the officers?" Kara asked. "Suspended with pay," Scarlett said bitterly. "For now. Their union is screaming about due process like that word was invented for them." Kara closed the folder. "Set a scheduling conference," she told Grayson. "Bring the state's team. I'll notify defense counsel of a disclosure hearing. Everything goes on the record." Scarlett smiled, feral and proud. "And, make them say it into the microphone." Later that week, the courtroom was packed. Reporters clustered near the back, notebooks ready. A few activists sat shoulder to shoulder in the gallery, shirts reading, "Hair is not a weapon." Officers hovered near the door, arms crossed. Kara took the bench with her head high, robes settling around her like armor. The murmur died instantly. "Calling the matter of State of Everett versus Reed Carter, Archer Sullivan, and Miles Walker," the clerk announced, voice echoing. At the defense table, 3 uniforms stood. Reed Carter's jaw was set, his hair trimmed with military precision. Archer Sullivan's face was grayer, eyes shadowed. Miles Walker looked different than he had that night, still young but older around the eyes, weight of sleeplessness in his posture. They turned toward the bench as one. Kara watched the moment recognition hit. Carter's face went slack, then flushed a blotchy red. Sullivan's eyes widened, the blood draining from his cheeks. Miles's lips parted, his gaze flicked, almost involuntarily, to her hair. Short, soft curls framing a face that had once been under his watch in a chair bolted to a floor. The silence in the courtroom wasn't quiet. It was a chorus of held breaths. Kara's voice, when it came, was steady. "Good morning," she said. "For the record, I am Judge Kara Hale, presiding." Carter seized his attorney's arm, hissing something. The lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, raised a hand. "Your Honor," he said, "before we proceed, the defense has a preliminary matter." "Of course you do," Kara said calmly. "Approach." As counsel moved toward the sidebar, she felt the eyes of the entire room on her. They had shaved a black judge's hair without knowing who she was. Now they knew. And the question hanging in the air, heavy as judgment, was simple. What would she do with that power? The microphones on the bench were small, but Kara could feel their weight like anchors. Everything she said now would live on the transcript forever, carved in ink and data. "This matter is on for a preliminary disclosure and recusal hearing," she began. "State of Everett versus Officers Reed Carter, Archer Sullivan, and Miles Walker. Before we address scheduling or motions, I need to place certain facts on the record." Her own voice sounded distant to her, as if she were listening from the gallery instead of the bench. At approximately 11:42 p.m. on June 14th of this year, I was stopped by Officer Carter during a traffic stop. I identified myself as Judge Kara Hale. I was nonetheless arrested and transported to Brookstone PD. During intake, I was restrained, and my hair was shaved by Officer Carter while Officers Sullivan and Walker were present. A whisper rolled through the gallery like wind through tall grass. Kara went on. "I subsequently filed an official complaint with Internal Affairs. That complaint and the associated footage are part of the foundation of this prosecution, which also includes other incidents involving unrelated detainees. I am therefore both the assigned trial judge and one of the alleged victims in the pattern and practice allegations. Defense counsel was already on his feet. Your Honor, with respect, that alone is enough. The defense moves for your immediate recusal. Under any standard, actual bias, perceived bias, the reasonable observer, this is untenable. You cannot fairly preside over a case in which you are a victim. Kara regarded him calmly. Counsel, you will have your opportunity. You will argue from the lectern, not from your feet, like you're chasing a train. Come forward. He approached, smoothing his tie. Leonard Parker for Officer Carter, Your Honor. Joined by counsel for Sullivan and Walker. Scarlett was in the first row behind the prosecution table, for once silent, eyes glued to the bench. Grayson beside her, jaw tight. Kara folded her hands. Mr. Parker, your written motion argues that my impartiality might reasonably be questioned. I want you to define reasonably for me. Any ordinary citizen, he said quickly, seizing the opening, upon learning that the judge had been forcibly shaved by the accused, would doubt that she could separate personal emotions from legal judgment. You're suggesting judges are less capable of that than, say, jurors? Kara asked. Jurors are often selected despite having experienced crime. We don't presume they're incapable of fairness. We question and instruct them. Why is the standard lower for me? Parker faltered for a second. The robe gives you more power, Your Honor, not less. The concern is that this power will be unconsciously weaponized. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Carter straighten, as if the phrase pleased him, weaponized. The irony was nauseating. Kara kept her face neutral. Do you allege that I have demonstrated actual bias in any ruling so far? Against your clients or against law enforcement generally? No, Your Honor. Do you allege that I have made any public statement about these defendants outside of the complaint process? No, but do you allege, she pressed, that I have used my position to influence charging decisions, investigation scope, or media coverage of this case? Parker's mouth tightened. Not yet, but the potential. The potential for abuse exists every day, Kara said, her voice sharpening. For every judge in every case, the code requires recusal when impartiality might reasonably be questioned, not when defendants prefer a different judge. She let that hang for a beat. Mr. Warner? Grayson rose. Your Honor, the state opposes recusal. The factual conflict has been fully disclosed. We have no concern about your ability to apply the law fairly and have seen no evidence to the contrary. If anything, your proximity to the harm clarifies the stakes for everyone involved. Parker pounced. Exactly our worry, Your Honor. The stakes are personal. At the defense table, Miles looked like he wanted to disappear. Archer stared straight ahead. Carter smirked, eyes narrowed, like he was watching a performance he expected to derail. Kara turned her gaze to the defendants. I'm going to do something unusual, she said. I'm going to speak not only as a judge, but as a person, and it will go on the record. The courtroom leaned in. What happened to me was dehumanizing, she said. Having my hair shaved against my will cut deeper than you may ever understand. It carried the weight of history, of racial humiliation, of state power used as a weapon. I would be lying if I said I don't still feel that when I look in the mirror. Carter's smirk twitched. But my job on this bench, she continued, is not to seek revenge. It is to apply the law fairly, to you, to the state, and to every person who steps into this room. If at any point I believe I cannot do that, I will recuse myself without hesitation. That remains true today. She shifted her attention back to Parker. Reasonable people might question my impartiality. That's why we're here. But a reasonable person, knowing everything we've just put on the record, would also see that recusal is not automatic when a judge has been wronged. If that were the rule, any party could force a new judge simply by mistreating the original one, through threats, harassment, or worse. Do you understand the precedent you're asking me to set? Parker's expression flickered. He hadn't thought of that. Your motion is denied, Kara said. I find that I can remain impartial. I have disclosed all relevant facts. Defense preserves its objection for the record. We will proceed, with scrutiny on every ruling I make. That is appropriate. That is also justice. She looked directly at the three men in uniform. You will receive a fair trial, she said. That's more than some people got in your custody. Carter's chair scraped as he shifted, rage tightening his face. You think fair is what this is? He muttered, too loud. This is a setup. You're just waiting to— Officer Carter, Kara said sharply, you will not speak unless spoken to. That is your only warning. His attorney yanked his sleeve. Carter clamped his jaw shut, but his eyes burned with a familiar contempt, the same look he'd worn when he turned on the clippers. Miles, beside him, stared down at his hands. His fingers were trembling. As the hearing moved to scheduling and discovery deadlines, his mind wasn't on dates or motions. It kept circling back to a thumb drive hidden in the bottom drawer of his bedroom dresser, taped beneath an old stack of traffic citations. The copy of the first video he'd made the night they shaved Judge Hale's hair. The copy he hadn't told anyone about. Not yet. The night after they shaved Kara's hair, Miles hadn't slept. He'd lain on his couch, uniform shirt still on, the TV flickering silently in the dark. The sound of the clippers buzzed in his skull, replaying again and again. He remembered her eyes most. Not the brief flash of panic that he'd seen on other faces, and he'd learned to stuff his guilt into a compartment labeled procedure. No, what haunted him was the way that panic had hardened into something colder, steadier. A look that said, I will remember you. I will remember this. At 3 a.m, he'd gotten up, driven back to the station under the pretense of finishing reports, and slipped into the small, cluttered room where the video server hummed. Tampering with evidence was a fireable offense, possibly criminal. He'd done it anyway. He hadn't erased anything. He'd simply copied the intake footage, the entire segment from when they strapped her into the chair to her being led out with her hair gone, onto a personal thumb drive. He'd stood there, sweating, as the progress bar crawled across the screen. He hadn't known why he was doing it. Insurance, conscience, maybe a small, desperate attempt to give the truth somewhere else to live, in case the official version got lost. Months later, when internal affairs stormed through the department, logs in hand, one of the investigators cornered him in the locker room. Walker, she said, folding her arms, your login appears on a transfer at 3:12 a.m. the night of June 14th. Explain. He'd had two options. Lie or step off the cliff. I made a copy, he said hoarsely, of the Hale intake video. I didn't alter it. I didn't delete anything. I just copied it. Where is it? She asked. He hesitated. Do you want to be the guy who helped hide what happened? She said quietly. Or the guy who helped prove it? He swallowed. It's at my apartment, he said. Bottom drawer of my dresser, taped under the back panel. Now, standing in the witness box, Miles felt like the entire city was watching him jump. State your name for the record, the special prosecutor said. Officer Miles Walker, he replied, voice barely above a steady murmur. Badge number 4172. He could feel Carter's stare boring into the side of his face. Sullivan sat stone still, but his clenched jaw betrayed him. Officer Walker, the prosecutor continued, do you recall the intake of Judge Kara Hale on June 14th? Yes, Miles said. Were you present? Yes. What was your role? I was assigned to assist with intake, he said. I escorted her from booking to the intake room. I was in the room when she was restrained. The prosecutor projected the intake video on the screen. There it was again. Kara, strapped to the chair, jaw set, clippers moving through her hair. Reed's bored expression, Archer's crossed arms. Miles, younger by months, but lighter by several lifetimes, standing in the corner, eyes flickering to the camera and away. The gasps that rose from the gallery weren't as shocked as the first time the footage had aired on the news, but they still hurt. "Is this a fair and accurate representation of what occurred that night?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," Miles said, "it is." "Did Judge Hale consent to having her hair shaved?" "No." "Did she resist physically?" "No." His throat tightened. "She protested verbally. She said it was an unlawful arrest. She warned that what we were doing was wrong, but she didn't fight the restraints." "What, if anything, did you do to stop the shaving?" Miles's stomach twisted. This was the question he'd been dreading. "Nothing," he said. The word dropped into the courtroom like a stone. "Why?" the prosecutor asked. "Because I was scared. Because I was new. Because the culture said you weren't supposed to question the senior officers. Because I told myself it was policy," he said instead, voice rough. "I told myself I didn't have the authority to intervene. I told myself it was," he swallowed, "just hair." He forced himself to look at Kara. She didn't glare. She didn't nod in forgiveness. She simply watched him, eyes steady, inviting him to finish the story. "And later?" the prosecutor asked. "You went back to the station. What did you do?" "I copied the video," he said, "onto a personal thumb drive." "Did anyone order you to do that?" "No." "Why did you do it?" This time he didn't look for better words. "Because I knew what we'd done was wrong," he said, "and I didn't trust that the evidence would survive. I knew there'd be pressure to bury it. I couldn't stop it that night, but I could make sure it couldn't disappear." "Is that thumb drive the source of the footage we're seeing now?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes." A murmur swept the room. At the defense table, Parker shot to his feet. "Your Honor, we move to strike this testimony as self-serving and prejudicial. Officer Walker is trying to paint himself as some sort of hero." Kara cut him off. "Overruled. The jury is capable of weighing his motives. The testimony goes directly to the chain of custody and the question of intent. Sit down, Mr. Parker." Parker sat, fuming. The prosecutor nodded. "Officer Walker, were you aware that the original intake footage, as stored on the department server, was later erased?" "Yes," Miles said. His palms were sweating. "Internal Affairs told me. The log shows it was deleted 2 weeks after the incident under Officer Carter's credentials." Carter exploded. "That's a damn lie!" "Officer Carter!" Kara's voice cracked through the room like a whip. "You will control yourself, or I will have you removed." He slammed back into his chair, eyes wild. The prosecutor let the outburst sit there, toxic and undeniable, before turning back to Miles. "Did Officer Carter ever discuss the Hale intake with you after that night?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "A few days later. He laughed about it, said, 'Guess Ms. High and Mighty Judge won't forget who runs the streets now.' He told me that if anyone came sniffing around, we were to say it was lice protocol and that she'd agreed." Silence. "And did she agree?" the prosecutor asked softly. "No," Miles said. "Not even close." The cross-examination was brutal. Parker painted Miles as a coward, a liar, a man trying to save his own skin by throwing his partners under the bus. He hammered the violation of policy in copying the video, suggested that the footage could have been altered. "If you were so righteous, Officer Walker," Parker sneered at one point, "why didn't you speak up that night? Why didn't you unstrap Judge Hale and walk her out of that room?" Miles swallowed hard. The courtroom blurred for a second. "Because I was a coward," he said quietly. "Because I chose my career over her dignity. That's the truth. I'm not proud of it. I have to live with that." Parker seemed stunned for a heartbeat. He'd expected excuses, not confession. "That cowardice," Miles went on, "is why I'm sitting here answering your questions. Not because I'm trying to be a hero. Because this," he gestured at the video frozen on the screen, "doesn't get to be the last word." He stepped down from the stand, feeling 10 years older. As he passed the defense table, Carter's whisper followed him like a snake. "You're finished, Walker. You think they'll love you for this? The DA, the judge, the public? You're done. Your brothers are done with you." Miles didn't answer. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like he was falling. He felt like he'd finally hit bottom, and that meant there was, however faintly, a way back up. The verdict came on a rainy Thursday, the kind of gray day that made the courthouse lights feel harsher. Kara took the bench to a packed room. Reporters lined the back wall. Community members filled the pews. A small cluster of officers in uniform sat stiffly near the doors, their faces a mix of defiance and dread. The jury filed in, avoiding everyone's eyes but their own. "Madam Foreperson," Kara said, "has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the woman replied, voice steady. "In the matter of State of Everett versus Officer Reed Carter," Kara intoned, "on count 1, deprivation of rights under color of law, how do you find?" "Guilty," the foreperson said. Carter's head jerked back, as if the word had struck him physically. "On count 2, obstruction of justice relating to the deletion of evidence?" "Guilty." "In the matter of Officer Archer Sullivan, on count 1, deprivation of rights under color of law by failure to intervene?" "Guilty." "On count 2, conspiracy to deprive civil rights?" "Guilty." Miles stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. "In the matter of Officer Miles Walker," Kara said, heart heavy, "on count 1, deprivation of rights under color of law by failure to intervene?" There was a heartbeat where the entire room seemed to stop breathing. "Guilty," the foreperson said softly. Miles closed his eyes. "And on count 2, obstruction of justice?" "Not guilty." The prosecutor exhaled. Scarlett's shoulders dropped a fraction. Grayson stared at the table, expression unreadable. Kara thanked the jury, discharged them with the solemnity the moment demanded, and set a date for sentencing. The weeks that followed were a blur of pre-sentence reports, victim impact statements, and late nights in chambers. Letters poured in, from community members whose hair had been shaved at intake, from parents whose children had been scarred, from former officers who described a culture where humiliation was considered a tool. Kara read them all. The day of sentencing, the rain had cleared. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, cutting bright bars across the wood. The 3 former officers stood at the defense table, no longer in uniform. Carter's posture was still defiant, but his eyes were ringed with sleepless hollows. Sullivan looked smaller somehow, as if someone had let the air out of him. Miles looked exactly like what he was, a man about to receive a deserved punishment, still hoping it could mean something more than pain. "Sentencing in this case is not simple," Kara began. "The law provides ranges. It also provides discretion. My responsibility is to use that discretion guided not by anger, but by the purposes of sentencing, punishment, deterrence, protection of the public, and the promotion of respect for the law." She turned first to Carter. "Mr. Carter," she said, deliberately using his last name without title, "you wielded your badge like a cudgel. You treated the people in your custody as props in a performance of power. You did not make a single impulsive mistake. You made a series of deliberate choices, shaving hair, ignoring pleas, mocking your victims, deleting evidence." His jaw worked. "It was policy," he muttered. "Everybody knew—" "No," Kara cut in. "Policy is what we write down. Culture is what we let happen. You helped create that culture. You thrived in it. And when confronted with the harm you caused, you have shown no real remorse." She sentenced him to 8 years in state prison on the deprivation count and 5 years on the obstruction count, to run consecutively, not the maximum but far from the minimum. You will also, she added, be permanently decertified as a law enforcement officer and barred from working in any capacity that involves custody over another person's body, security, corrections, or otherwise. You forfeited that trust. Next, she turned to Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, you were not the loudest voice, she said. You were the one who crossed his arms and looked away. You told yourself you were just following policy, but you knew better. Years on the job gave you not just power, but perspective. You saw the pattern. You chose silence. His eyes glistened. She sentenced him to 5 years, with 2 suspended for supervised release, conditioned on his cooperation in ongoing investigations and mandatory participation in restorative justice programs with willing victims. Then she faced Miles. Mr. Walker, she said, and his name seemed to echo. You failed in your duty the night you watched my hair fall on that floor, she said. You failed every person whose pain you wrote off as procedure. The guilty verdict on that count is warranted. He nodded, throat too tight for words. But, she continued, you also did something that none of your colleagues had the courage to do. You preserved the truth when others tried to erase it. You testified against your own interests, knowing the cost. That does not erase your failure. It does, however, matter. She sentenced him to 18 months in county jail, with 6 suspended and 3 years of probation. He would serve his time. He would lose his badge, but he would not lose his entire life. You will also, she said, be required to speak, once you are able, to every training academy class in this state for the duration of your probation. Not as an expert, as a cautionary tale. You will tell them where cowardice leads. He blinked rapidly. Yes, Your Honor, he managed. Finally, she addressed the city itself. This case is not just about 3 officers, she said, projecting her voice so it filled every corner of the room. It is about what we tolerate when we look the other way. The shaving of hair in intake was not an accident. It was a practice, a ritual of control, and it was disproportionately used on people of color, on people who were already vulnerable. She signed the consent decree that had been painstakingly negotiated. Independent monitors for the department, mandatory body cam retention, a complete overhaul of intake procedures, and a ban on any non-medically necessary hair removal. She added one more provision of her own. The City of Brookstone, she read from the order, will create the Hale Fund for Dignity and Justice, a permanent fund, financed in part by civil penalties in this case and future findings, to provide counseling and legal support for individuals harmed by unlawful police practices. It will also fund scholarships for students from impacted communities who pursue law, social work, or public interest fields. Scarlett's breath caught. Grayson's eyes closed briefly, as if in exhausted relief. Carter sneered. So you get a fund named after you. Must feel good. Kara looked at him, almost with pity. You think this is about my name? She said. You still don't understand anything. Afterward, when the deputy led the men away in cuffs, Kara's gaze met Miles's for a moment. He dipped his head, not asking for forgiveness, not expecting it, just acknowledging the strange, painful grace of being judged by the person he had once failed. Months later, the Hale Fund's first scholarship recipient, a young black woman whose hair had been shaved at 15 for a shoplifting charge that was later dropped, stood in front of a small audience and announced she was going to law school. Kara watched from the back, hat low over her short curls, anonymous in the crowd. The girl's voice shook but didn't break. I want to be the kind of lawyer who doesn't need a judge to save the day, she said. I want systems that don't need heroes to be humane. Scarlett leaned over and whispered, You did that. Kara shook her head. No, she murmured. We all did, and we all failed too. That's the point. Responsibility is not a one-time act, it's a practice. Outside, the city was still imperfect. There were still bad stops, bad nights, bad choices. But there was also a camera in every intake room, a monitor reviewing every tape, a rookie somewhere hearing Miles Walker say, "I was a coward, and it cost people pieces of themselves." Karma had come, not as a lightning bolt, but as a mirror, held up to everyone. And the hardest, most necessary part was looking into it and not looking away. If you're still here listening to this story, take a breath with me. A woman's hair was never the real crime in that room. The crime was power with no accountability, silence where there should have been courage, and a system that called humiliation policy until someone finally said, "Enough." Judge Kara Hale didn't get justice because she wore a robe. She got it because truth refused to stay buried, because someone chose, late and imperfectly, to do the right thing, and because a city was finally forced to look in the mirror. If this story stirred something in you, anger, hope, maybe a memory of your own, don't let it stop here. Please tap like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And as you go, remember, real justice isn't just karma hitting back. It's responsibility, owned in full, even when it hurts.